Hey folks, busy week in Washington, D.C. Let's just start out with the first thing on the docket, H.R. 2157, the disaster relief proposal. And if you're familiar with this a little bit, this was the bill that Nancy Pelosi and crew tried to pass when we weren't in session. We were out of session for a few days for the Memorial Day observance, and they tried to pass it then under what's called unanimous consent. But not everybody unanimously consented, and so it was held up when we had a vote on the bill. And the reason that folks didn't consent unanimously is there are problems with the bill. This is, I think, $19.2 billion in disaster relief spending, and I would just tell you a couple things. First of all, the agencies have had months and months and months to determine the cost of the disaster so that they can let us know so that we can fund it appropriately. None of that's been done. So essentially, we're literally just throwing money at these issues and these disaster circumstances without knowing the cost whatsoever. So that's a problem for me. There were, as usual, no hearings on it. There was no opportunity to weigh in. And so that's why they were trying to pass it under unanimous consent. There's no accountability for it. There's no offset, so this is just more deficit spending. And there are other things that I find problematic. For instance, if you're a farmer with crop insurance, this paid over and above your crop insurance up to 90%. But if you were a farmer who didn't have crop insurance, this paid 70%. Now, 70% certainly doesn't absolve the loss of your 100% of whatever you lost, but that's why they have crop insurance. And so if you're a farmer who did pay for crop insurance, is it fair that the person next to you that didn't pay anything still gets 70% of the loss recovered? So I find that just completely unfair, not the fact withstanding that we had losses last summer, if you recall, in York County, in southern York County, some devastating losses where people literally lost their entire home. 1 minute, the house was there, they went out to get something. When they returned home an hour later, house, road, everything completely gone. None of that was covered in this disaster relief proposal. I can kind of go on and on. I've got a whole list of the numbers here if you care to call the office and they can go through them with you. Here's kind of the list of all the billions and millions of dollars that were spent on different programs without any accountability, but I found that pretty problematic. Then we had H.R. 6, the American Dream and Promise Act of 2019, which I just generally call the Open Border Bill. It allows anybody that has come to the country that wants to claim DACA or otherwise, if you're in the country, a green card and a path to citizenship where you step in line in front of everybody else just because you're here.
Who's the everybody else?
What do you mean, who's everybody?
You just said you step in front of everybody else.
For instance, we have people that came here legally. They have been go through the process. Some people literally for decades. For decades. They've been going through the process, and you get to step in front of them in getting your legal status and residence, your citizenship. You get to step in front of all them. That is unacceptable. We have a family in the district who has come here legally, followed all the processes. Their son is a special needs individual, and the law requires them, because he is not in college and not working, again, he has special needs. The law requires them to send him back to his country of origin, which he doesn't know. All these people under this bill would step in line in front of him for citizenship. It's just wholly unfair. Not to mention, it's also dangerous. We have a list of gang members and gang-related activity that U.S. Customs and Immigration Service scrubs against people that want to come here and be in this country. And if you're on the list as a gang member, like MS-13 or the Latin Kings or something like that, you can be removed from the country because of your gang activity. This bill precludes checking that list to see if you're a gang member. I don't know how this is good or safe for communities.
So what if you are a gang member? So we're just letting you in?
Under the provisions of this, let's be completely transparent here. The secretary may look at the list and say, you can't be here. Just understand, 5,000 people a day are coming across the border illegally. I suspect the secretary's not going to have time to look at 5,000 people, the list of 5,000 people a day, to determine which one. Only the secretary can decide. Only the secretary. It's ridiculous.
There's no vetting whatsoever.
There's no vetting whatsoever. So, I just found that very problematic. It was the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, where the Chinese people striving to breathe free protested in Tiananmen Square 30 years ago. I remember it. You might remember it as well. And so we kind of commemorated that circumstance, because the Chinese government is trying to erase that, and functionally has erased it from history in China. And so we want to let the Chinese, the freedom-loving Chinese people, know that we haven't forgotten it. And we want to make this distinction. The Chinese people are very distinct from the communist government of China, which steals our intellectual property, is bellicose to its neighbors, and imprisons its population. And we're trying to draw that very clear distinction. But we have that observance, and my push is that we do more than just observe that and have a resolution saying that this was bad, but that we actually take concrete steps against China and their malign behavior, malevolent behavior towards the United States in particular, whether it's intellectual property theft, whether it's interrupting the sea lanes in the East China Sea, or whether it's collecting on us through things like the Confucius Institute, or laundering dirty North Korean money through our stock exchange. We must take a much harder stance on China. And also, this week, of course, was the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And I will just tell you, it's an emotional time. If you think about what America provided, and what, quite honestly, our neighbors, Canada, the UK, etc., on the breaches of Normandy, and that invasion, the largest sea invasion, the logistics of it. If you know how many people died in just the exercise, the train up for the invasion, this is an incredible sacrifice, and I just got a chill. It is the very, very dear cost of freedom. And just remember, let's remember who we were fighting against and what we were fighting against. We were fighting against fascism, and we were fighting against socialism. And these people, America's bravest and best, gave their lives in defense of freedom against socialism. And so that's why many people like me take this so seriously when we hear this open conversation that somehow socialism is going to be good for America. And just not the right people have been in position to orchestrate or administer socialism. If we get the right people, it will turn out well. It never turns out well, folks. Socialism, communism, totalitarianism, which is where socialism always leads, because people don't want to be told how to live their lives. That's where it always leads, because it leads to someone controlling them when they disobey, is responsible. Those systems are responsible for the untimely and very unpleasant deaths of 100 million souls in the last century alone. And if you talk about China, you know, we talk about what happened in Nazi Germany, concentration camps. Unfortunately, we have the same situation happening in China on this very day, and that's why this is so poignant. Among other things, the souls lost, and the enormous sacrifice, knowing pretty sure that when you got on the boat, it was going to be your final act, and yet these brave young men got on the boats and stormed beaches. And so I just can't say enough about that. It is great to live in a free country. That's what happened this last week. Next week, I think, begins the appropriation season. That's when we determine how much of your money is spent on what things. And so we're going to see some new things under new Democratic leadership, so I hope they allow amendments. We will see. We always did. It usually takes hours and hours and hours, maybe days, because there are so many amendments, at least under the Republican-led Congress. We'll see what happens. I think they're going to put 5 or 6 of these bills together. There is this huge spending, and this is an opportunity to try and rein back in some of our deficit spending, which we continue to spend at record levels, and we're bankrupting our country. So that's what's happening in the week to come, and I'll be happy to talk to you at the end of next week and give you an update. We'll see how it goes. Till then, have a great and safe and prosperous week.